and Innovation team. Our team has delivered, over the last 2+ years, has delivered numerous programs, services, and workshops virtually. But today's discussion focused on how CEOs can work with their boards to help their businesses grow is the first in-person event we've held since the pandemic arrived in Ontario. So we're excited to be here today and excited to have you here today, and very excited for the panelists to be joining us in person. Before I introduce our moderator, I'd like to invite Jim Banting, our Assistant Vice Principal, Queen's Partnerships and Innovation, to provide a land acknowledgement.
I'm also keen to see everybody here. Thanks for being here. So I'll start with saying Ani, welcome. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the land which we gather. This is the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. To recognize our privileged journeys to learn and live on these lands. For myself, I'm thankful I have the opportunity of learning, sharing, and raising a family. Learning for myself encompasses the understanding and applying the principles of reconciliation. This is in one part my actions to create a more equitable and inclusive community by closing the many gaps in our society that exist between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples on the land we call Canada, but also known as Turtle Island. I'd encourage everyone here today to take time to consider our own positionality on this land, to reflect on the privilege that this land provides, and lastly, how we are contributing towards reconciliation. Miigwech, thank you. Look forward to the program.
Thank you, Jim. So now I would like to introduce the moderator of today's session, Peter Becke. Some of you have had the opportunity of working with Peter over the last couple of years. And I'd like to provide a bit of an intro to Peter and his significant areas of expertise and experience that are relevant to today's topic. So I'll start by acknowledging that Peter has 2 degrees from Queen's, his law degree and his MBA, which enabled him to enjoy a successful 30-year career with Nortel, which took him to international places and had him operating in VP roles. Peter has been the CEO of startups and scaling companies. He has been and continues to participate on and contribute to numerous boards and advisory boards. And for the past 2.5 years, we've had the distinct pleasure of having Peter be a part-time member of our QPI team, providing mentorship to companies poised to scale. So with that, I'll turn the mic over to Peter and ask him to launch the process and introduce our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. I should have recorded that for my LinkedIn. I think we all need a deep breath. I felt a bit stressed coming here last night crossing the causeway, and I wasn't sure why that was. And I was thinking back to the law school finals. Is it sitting at the jock party or anything? Thinking, oh my God, I really shouldn't be here. Is I did a lot of track at school. Is it the anticipation of a major event? And then I realized I just haven't actually been with a lot of people for a very long time, let alone interacting with such a distinguished group of panelists. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Janice and Queens, for putting on this event. And most importantly, thank you to the panel for agreeing to do this. To have a board or not to have a board, that is the question. Now, we're not going to wax poetic like Shakespeare. I think we'll get much more out of this, much more practical feedback than Shakespeare has ever provided. But we're hoping that through this discussion and interactive discussion that we can give you a better opinion as to if you are a CEO, should you have a board or advisory board if you have a choice? If you have a board, is there something you can do to elevate the impact it has on your company and on you as a CEO? If you don't have a board or advisory board, what might you be thinking of? I would like to do a bit of a poll first to see how many people, I do recognize some of you, but are CEOs or about to be CEOs of companies. You have all to put your hands up too. And there's probably a mixture I've taken of formal boards, founder boards, and advisory boards. Am I correct? Okay. So hopefully you'll leave this session with a bit of a thought process about the next stage of growth of your business and whether a board or an advisory board can help. It's not meant to be a legal seminar on corporate governance, even though I'd love to do that on another occasion. I suspect we'd have a much smaller turnout. It's meant to be a bit of a leadership seminar on you as a leader and you leveraging a board to grow your business and maybe to grow yourself as a CEO as well. So I'm going to ask each of the panel members, starting with Jeffrey, to introduce themselves, maybe talk a bit about who they are, what the company does, what stage the company's at, and the high-level makeup of the board. So just 1 or 2 minutes, and then we'll go from there, just to give you a bit of a perspective. Maybe Jeffrey, starting with you.
Sure. So my name is Jeffrey Sett. I'm the CEO of a company called Thrive Career Wellness Platform. What we do is build software to help people advance their careers at a high level. We sell our software to large enterprises to help invest in their talent. They use the product if people are part of their organization as a placement or career transition product, as well as internal redeployment and internal talent mobility. And the easiest way to describe our product, customers describe it this way, is we have a blend of software tools to help you analyze your careers, your skills, what you'd like to do next in your career, and then an integrated marketplace to help you advance your career. So everything from upskilling and reskilling services, career coaching, skill analysis tools, everything of that nature. From a stage perspective, I guess we're about 30 people now, going through some stuff right now that probably changing a makeover board going forward, which is exciting. And from my perspective, interacting with boards, so I started the company about 7 years ago. Like a lot of entrepreneurs, we've gone through a number of twists and turns. Funny enough, we actually started out selling software to university and college career centers. It's an awful business model. Don't suggest that. And for me, like I started the company when I was pretty young. I had a formal board of directors before we had any employees. We were 2 founders that started to get our first sales. And we're fortunate enough to raise some capital pretty early on, and which Peter played a part of. He's been an investment company for a while, as well as some other investors. And so, from my perspective, having boards has always been part of our company. So I'm looking forward to chatting more.
For all of you that don't know how to answer that question on the board, I'm your representative here. Scott Selby. I founded a small company for analyzing movement data from people. Just the software end of it, 25 years ago. And about 5 years ago, we got into a position where the changes in artificial intelligence, deep neural networks, made it possible to find people and to analyze their movement from only video cameras, with or without their awareness. So if you need to track an athlete to determine if they are injured or if you want to change their performance, that's what we do. It applies in many other areas. So for 23 of those years, I had a company that had no board. Very small, niche market, mostly academics and government. Didn't need a board. To now transitioning to a company that has been growing. We have some big customers. So once you get past Microsoft, Apple, and Amazon on our list, then you get to the shoe and apparel companies. These are very different from dealing with university. And so we anticipated this, so we had a board that was created, but the board was just the founders. And then the board became the founders and an angel investor. It's not an ideal model because the entire board is learning together. And I guess I'm going to get questions that I'm going to have to give uncomfortable answers to along the way. How we're moving forward. I will say that we had to have an external advice committee, especially someone that had no skin in the game. And that's where we got fortunate enough to assign Peter. And Peter is slowly taking us through this process of uncomfortable questions. Go ahead,
I didn't think it was that uncomfortable, actually. I was about to notch it up and understand it, now that we're like, Roger and Peg, you run successful companies, you sit on boards, you invest in companies. So when you talk a bit about it, maybe morphing out of when you were running a company and now you're advising and or sitting on boards of companies.
Sure, yeah, my name is Roger Bose. I'm a serial entrepreneur and now an angel investor. I actually went to Queens, so fun memories. I guess, these days I'm on the board of Launch Lab, which is the local regional innovation center helping start companies. I'm also on the board of SOAN, which is the local angel network here. So we provide real estate introductions to provide startup capital to angel investors to real estate companies. I'm also an advisor to some of the companies that I've invested in. For example, Rockmass Technologies, which took some IP out of Queens through Spartak, but PI, licensed that technology, tools and mining companies around the world doing tools as well, came out of the EQS program here at Queenston. So, I have a lot of fun doing that. I'm also on the investment review committee for SOPI, which is the Southern Ontario Fund for Investment in Innovation, and I'll give a little plug here for SOPI. It's a government-sponsored program that gives loans to usually early-stage companies that are innovating. The minimum threshold would probably be 8 employees. You have to have sales, you have to be growing. The real idea is to create jobs here in Ontario. I guess we're in the fortunate or maybe unfortunate position that we're sitting on over $10 million in cash right now. So it's matching money if you think you're eligible or know of a company that might be, please reach out to me, or it's SOFII, so loan program. We'd love to deploy some of this cash. Previous to that, I was CEO and president of Laser Depth Dynamics, which was another company that spun out of Queens. We had technology doing laser depth measurement for quality control, mostly robots, welding parts together, automotive, electric vehicles, and seating and stuff like that. Really cool technology. Paul Webster and I co-founded it. He's my ideas as well in the physics department. We got acquired by IBT Photonics, which is a $1 billion publicly traded company based in Boston, I guess 5 years ago now. The company's still here in Kingston. In fact, we built a manufacturing and research facility just behind the railroad and in the near future. So that was really interesting. In that case, we did have external investors, and therefore we had on our board not just the founders and investors in the company. So that was a little bit of a different dynamic. The other company that I mentioned previous to Laser Depth, I was CEO of ESG Solutions, which the company still does seismic monitoring, mostly to do with mining, geotech, energy applications. In that case, also Queenston, a bit of a theme here. In that case, the board, I was one of the owners. I had 3 other owners of the company. Was just the founders of the company. It was I was going to say dynamic board. There was not always agreement on what we should be doing, so that made it interesting. But it's interesting to contrast, having the external board members and that setup at Laser Depth versus the ESG
glad to be out again and seeing everybody. I think I probably know half of the room. So half of you just kind of tune me up for the next little while, and the other half, I'll give you my quick elevator pitch of who I am. I was the founder and CEO. I guess technically I still am, because we didn't sell the company, we sold the intellectual property. So I founded a company in my basement with 3 engineers. I was the business side. And my role, I always joke that I used to do everything except for the engineering design and machining, although there is a photo of me standing on a wooden block trying to cut metal piece. So that only lasts once, and then they're like, okay, you can't cut a straight line, you're never allowed to touch anything again. So I was good with that. So I started in the basement with 3 engineers, became a CEO 3 years after, and took the company from the basement to the global stage. We developed intellectual property called, well, now it's called simply, it used to be called CNC Assembly in 2012, and filed patent in 4 continents and sold in 4 continents. And a big global company called ATS Automation, they're a $2 billion publicly traded company. I think within half an hour, we talked about technology, decided that they want to acquire it. So they did. It moved really fast, and wind down the rest of the company, took the remaining asset, which is the manufacturing side, and with 3 of my former managers, spun it off to a new company that they are now running. So I still kind of have my toe in the entrepreneurial world. And I am actually the VP of commercialization at ATS for the technology that they acquire. So that's what I'm doing these days. Aside from that, to your point, Peter, while we're here, I only had a founder board at Transformix, but I'm a lifelong learner. I've always felt that, I started the company young, didn't have all the answers, and so how am I going to learn? And that idea that, when you're at the top, it's a very lonely road. The first thing I did was I actually created something called CEO Roundtable with Mr. Bose here and 3 other CEO, and we actually helped each other kind of through the early growth. And the story I always share about what that was critical was I was actually in a IP lawsuit early in the company's life. And it was at one of those meetings that one of the CEOs said, have you met John Malloy and Karen Martin Steve from Partech at the time? And I didn't know them at the time, and went in, and they spent a lot of time with me, and I learned what the whole, IP and the lawsuit and all that. So, so that was kind of my, the CEO Roundtable was more of a peer group. Then I took it further and go, wait a minute, there are lots of retired executives here. And how do I tap into their experience, their knowledge, their know-how? And how do I tap into for free? Because, as a startup, I didn't have money. I don't know about the rest of you, but we actually bootstrapped the entire organization, no investors, and it was a lot of learning curve. And so at that time, there was an organization called Relics. I don't know if they're still around, called Retired Executive Living in Kingston. And that's the beauty about this community. There's a lot of retirees here. And so I tapped into that organization and had 3 of them serve on my, I would say informal, because once you make it formal, then there's liabilities, which I didn't want to deal with, nor did they. So I had an informal board of advisors throughout the history of Transformix. Now I'm on the other side. I have served on a number of boards. My longest board gig is at the Kingston General Hospital, and then at the Health Science Center. And with that environment, to what Peter was saying, that is truly what a board, third-party board should look like, right? What is the role of a board, which is more of a governance and a strategy, which is very different from a founder's board. So I have that experience. I think it was 8 years in total. I've also served on a number of advisory boards throughout Ontario, and again, those are slightly different because you don't have that governance roles, but they're looking more for experience. So I can kind of come at different angles because I've done it, and so that's kind of my history in a nutshell.
Well, congratulations on all that accomplishment. I just think it's great to hear entrepreneurs talk about where they are, where they're going, what they've done, what they want to do, and we should celebrate entrepreneurs more than hockey players. Thank you. assume that the answer may come from advisory board, founders board, they can qualify their answer accordingly. Let's ask some questions, anybody can vote up my speak. So, do you look forward to your board meetings? Jeffrey, Scott, I'm going to ask you first, is this something that you can pump up? We I just can't wait to have my board meeting, what fun it'll be.
Told you it was uncomfortable.
Should we leave?
I'm not on this board yet, I'm just a friendly advisor.
When they real founder board, and you know that board has no experience, then you have to live through the conflict of respecting the members of the board, but not respecting the board. But they don't know what they're doing either. And yet, if you really are going to grow, sooner or later you're going to have to figure out how to have the board act properly. They're either going to have to learn it or you're going to have to replace it.
So I think I've got a wide range of emotions regards to looking
I don't think you're emotional at all.
Yeah, so
I like about you.
yeah, so it's interesting, right? First, starting the company, had no idea what a board meeting was, or even what I needed to be presenting, or how I wanted to run that board meeting. So at the start, it was probably, maybe sometimes it feels a little bit like a homework assignment, where you're answering a lot of questions that you understand. And, so kind of stressful experience. Then I'd say start to hit our stride, where you feel like you're really, running the company pretty well, and things are going pretty well, and you're getting good feedback. And then I'd say, started feeling like I wasn't getting a lot out of my board, and that was probably, I'd say, about 18 months ago, or 12 months ago, where, started to feel like, in a way, my subject expertise of the industry we're working in has surpassed that of the people that are sitting on my board. I guess that's the easiest way to describe it. And from a learning perspective, I think having a board is really important. I think that there's a lot of things about business I'm still learning, I don't understand. We sell to enterprise customers. There's our customers, Scotiabank, Walmart, Lowe's. We do business in various jurisdictions. Those are things that you don't know how to deal with those when you're in your late 20s. So a lot of value, but then we got to a certain point. And I think for example, this is where I started to realize now, I think similar fashion, it's time for us to shake up our board, or we need something different, right? And that's when we started the process, I guess, of we need some new investors, we need some new capital, we need some new ideas to help this company get to the next level. And so it's never been a dread, or we haven't had anything dramatic or any disagreements or anything of that nature. I'd say as the company evolves, you have different feelings about board meetings, or what you're getting out of them. And I really think it's important to determine, if you're looking at bringing on external investors, what you're looking for, what you're looking for your board members, how you operate, what's going to impact all this.
I'm just going to stay with you for a second.
Yeah.
So Jeffrey's in the midst of closing a Series A financing round. With that comes the opportunity and the demand to change the board.
Yeah.
Including looking for some added value, not just looking for the investor. What's going through your mind right now? And this is to close.
Well, it's like, these supposed to close on Friday. So if I jinx it right now, I'm sending Queens and invoice.
I really are U.S.
There's a lot going on, right?
I said to cover your tracks.
Yeah, so no, that's a good question. And I think that, investors provide a lot of things. The most important thing they provide is capital, right? So at the end of the day, that's the most important thing they provide. It's really important, I think, to ensure you have alignment from those investors with regards to what your expectations are for the company, as well as their expectations. And then hopefully also have, you're bringing on somebody that has a lot of industry experience, right? So was fortunate vis-a-vis, raising your own capital. I think we could do an entire session on raising your own capital. It's a sales process, and we identified investors in specific verticals that were really relevant to us, that have experience that's really relevant to us. So, for example, the individual that's joining my board, is an entrepreneur that sold his last company as an HR platform. It's an HR platform company. It's an applicant tracking system company. Sells to the exact same buyers that we sell into, and just exited that for about $250 million about a year ago, and started an investment fund, right? So for me, was really attracted to working with him because he just went through the same journey we're trying to go through from a growth perspective, right? And was CEO of a company at the exact stage I'm at right now, and took it to an outcome that I would be very happy with. And so I think that played a large part in finding the right investor. I think because obviously I have a lot of friends that run companies at similar stages of people in need. I would say it's alignment. A lot of the massive issues that entrepreneurs and boards run into, from my experience talking to people, is when there was misalignment on what they're using that capital for, what the growth plans of that capital is for. When you take off, I always get frustrated when I see people say we raised a lot of money from this VC, and then they wanted us to grow really fast, and we wasted a bunch of money. Well, no, that's the plan that you signed up for. Anyways, so that alignment, because if you don't have that alignment, that's where I think you're really going to result in some really poor outcomes.
And Roger, I wanted to ask you kind of the same question, but more from the point of view of when you go to a board meeting, and there are different boards, and you have the CEO or the leader of that company or organization, how do you approach a board meeting? And you are operating differently than when you were running a company and go to the board meeting. How does our role change, or does it?
Well, I think that's really changed, particularly, like I said, when you're serving like an organization with the Houston General Hospital or the General Health Science Center, where the role of a board is very much about governance or strategy, right? Where it's a specific session for strategy. That's totally different because you go in knowing that your role is very different than that of as a CEO, where there's more of a day-to-day operation, more a day-to-day function. And I sat with board members who don't know the distinctions, and bluntly it's annoying because we're not there to do the role of CEO, because if we were, we should probably fire the CEO, right? That's just my opinion. Versus so that question you were earlier, was I nervous about it? No, because again, having a founder's board who were intimately involved in the business, I was very specific about meetings that are, day-to-day operation meetings and they all worked for me, funny enough, right? Because I was the CEO, they all report to me either directly or indirectly. But then I would have quote-unquote board meetings where we were in to either look at the financial statements or a funding situation or a strategy. So they were I try to separate and be distinct, because one is they are my board members, so kind of a weird twist, I'm working for them now and I'm talking about their money. The other is they work for me, which is day-to-day operation. So I think it's important to have that clear distinctions. On the CEO roundtable, I love seeing these guys. We met quarterly, and inevitably I knew I was going to learn something because we were all kind of at the same stage of where our business was and share a lot of similar issues, because we are all in, I chose that, there was only 8 of us, and I chose those 7 CEO. I think, Roger, you and I first talked about it. Either you and I first talked about it, or Evan and I first talked about it. And we specifically chose CEO that were kind of the same stage as we were, particularly in technologies, which has a slightly different twist than, let's say, someone in retail, right? So, love going to those meetings, and I was an organizer and planner, so I only had time to do 4 times a year, which was perfect. And then the informal board advisors, again, I've had sessions where they came in and helped us kind of work through our strategy. I've had sessions where it was a specific issues that I need to address. And it wasn't their money. I knew they were serving like as a real board. So it's more, again, what can I learn from them? So I was always excited to speak about.
Can I jump in on that for a second? Because I think the point with regards to what's a board responsibility and a CEO responsibility is something that is really confusing sometimes for like first-time entrepreneurs. I think it'd be really helpful. What is something that should be being discussed? Like, what are the topics boards should be looking at from a governance perspective? And then are the topics that are then like, wait a minute, we should be replacing the CEO if we're talking about that at a board level? Because I think that was something that I think that confuses a lot of entrepreneurs, and that's where there can be like the wrong expectations as to what your board's actually going to do. So if anyone wants to jump in on that, I think it's a really important topic.
Sometimes, maybe your board's a case in point. When you have people that are operating that have done well, I think it's sometimes even more difficult because they want to roll up their sleeves again and they think they know the right answer and they're quite opinionated, right? So your board's a strong board on paper, but it's a weak board in practice, in my view.
Yeah.
And I don't want to share an addition to me who's on the board, but we don't operate as effectively as I would have hoped we would have when we built the board. And we had some choice. And again, most people look at your board and say, wow, are you ever lucky? I would say maybe, maybe not. Yes, money came, but there's only so many board meetings you can have where you ask the same question. So who really is our customer? And that was the first 2 years of board meetings. Somebody always wanted to dive back down into that. And Jeffrey's I was going to say you're a kind of considerate person, but no, he just met that dead on, and you could see the frustration. So having now a U.S. serious investor who seriously knows the business, I don't think that'll be the next 2 years of question. It'll be how do we scale, how do we grow, how can we help you?
Yeah.
Not to take away from Roger, but to your point, I think that's on the board members who don't know their job, right? Their job isn't to run your business. Their job is to, again, this is a formal board, not the informal.
Yeah.
So don't want to take away from you, Roger, so I'm going to turn the light on you.
I forgot what the question was. Should we be nervous about our board meetings?
No, how do you approach them? And is it different now that you're on boards, you advise CEOs, and before, and of course your board history is a bit different than, say, Jeffrey, but how do you approach it in terms of you're not running an organization, but you're trying to provide some kind of value add?
And I think for the people that know me here, I'm not a meetings guy. I suppose there are some people that look forward to meetings, but I'm certainly not one of them. I think it's way more fun to just get on with doing the business. But I think what I would say is that I think having a formal board process, even for small companies where the founders are the board members, is really important. I think that it forces you to, separate the management from the board role, the ownership of the company, and to, you're doing your day-to-day job, and then you're meeting about, the big rocks, as they would say. And that formalization thinking, I think, really helps, especially as the company starts to grow. And this from a guy that hates meetings and process, generally. What I would say is that at ESG, as I said, we had a dynamic board. But everybody's working in the business every day, so they kind of know what's going on. But I think my only trick was really and there were some contentious meetings, differing opinions, and I think in some ways that's helpful. Like everybody's just, some of these not-for-profit boards that I'm on, it's like, can't we just challenge everyone's just a yes person, they're just a puppet, right? Yeah, exactly, and so that's not a good decision for me, right? So when you've got a growing company where, let's be honest, like the owners and the board members, this is, probably, a substantial part of their net worth is invested in this company, so they care about what happens. But really my only trick was to go and talk to the individual, board members, shareholders, to be like, okay, look, this is what's on the table. We can sit around the table and how to fight about it. I don't see how that's productive, but let's try to think about what's realistic here. And so to kind of share the process, get some idea about what we wanted to do, and then to come to the meeting with a formal agenda. Look, this is, it wasn't quite Robert's Rules of Order, but it was like, here's the decisions, here's what I'm proposing as the CEO, and, and at that point, it was really a formality. Like, there was no, by the time it gets that far, there's nothing that's going to people are gonna say their piece and whatever, but I think that was healthy and it made good decisions because everybody kind of knew the rules of engagement. If it really was a deal breaker for the company, we're absolutely not going to do this full stop. Ultimately, it's backstopped by the shareholders agreement and what level of approval do we need. But it never really came to that. But I think that was important, and I think for companies that are, in the case I'm talking about, you know, the founders are, the owners are, the board, I would encourage people to engage in that process formally because I think it really helps. And then if you make the step where you then come and bring on, you know, external members, there's at least a bit of a framework and a process. It's not just a free-for-all of like, what are we doing here today? And it's really different.
That's a formality. Our board is learning. So I started out saying we were clueless when we weren't. But being forced to go through it, and yes, I was very nervous at the first two board meetings. Very uncomfortable. We came out disagreeing and everybody didn't like each other for days on end for the first year. But it forced us to formulate our ideas more or less in thought. So it's everything that happens outside of the board meeting because of the board. You know you have to present to the board. You know could, in the future, if you grow to the point where you have an external board, you don't want to look like children fighting over a ball. So it may not seem so important when it's a founders board, but that process of formulating your ideas, getting yourself in place, finding out who should be talking, who shouldn't be talking, led to last night's board of directors meeting, which took an hour and a half. It was very straightforward. And we walked away with an agreement. And that's the first board meeting we've done that. Every other board meeting has been, how are we going to save this? Save the relationships. So the formality of it is actually the best part.
Yeah, I was just going to actually make that comment or say it. You know, it's pretty busy running a company. Step back and now kind of do a status update to people that kind of know your company or really know your company or have invested in your company. It's good to reflect on it and to be clear where we are, what's going well, what's not, how can you help, where are we going, you know, that kind of thing. It's almost like a pitch deck. I don't really like pitch decks. I don't really find that it tells me much about the company, but it does organize your thoughts as an entrepreneur to put one together. And I think that's, you know, the same thing with the board meeting. Once in a while, rise up, elevate, pretend you're like a board member looking at this as a shared responsibility and evaluate, you know, how's it going? You know, honest evaluation, how's it going? What can we do better? Not just at the board meeting, but for the business after all, that's why you're there, right? So actually it was Scott and hearing about his board meeting, and I just had this casual question, how'd the board meeting go? That's kind of what made us think maybe some kind of a workshop on making boards help me grow a business, maybe other elements of getting ready for a board meeting. But here's this company on absolute fire, just firing all cylinders, incredible progress, even in the short time that I've known it, leaving a board meeting kind of feeling beat up. And I thought, this is crazy. Jeff was the same thing. You know, we would have calls after board meeting. What is going on, right? And maybe it doesn't matter that you have a board that seemingly is more hostile or just naive or doesn't understand or taking the energy away, which is the big thing, you know. But the opposite is what we're all trying to do is a high energy, support you, drive you, make you better, feel good about it. I mean, that's the goal of a board.
I just want to add to what Roger was saying too. A founder's board where the partners are working intimately in the business. We didn't do any sort of formal presentation either, because to Roger's point, they know the business. They're in there with you 12, 14, 16, 18 hours a day. They know what's going on. So a lot of issues are resolved along the way. So I didn't do any of the formal board presentation, but I would have a formal board meeting for high-level stuff. Like you know, company, someone offered to buy your company IP for tens of millions. that requires a board meeting, right? What's happening with your shareholders, that requires a board meeting. Or what are we going to do 5 years from now? Here's my vision, are you on board? You already had a lot of those side conversations that by the time you get to the boardroom, you just want everybody to have hear the same dialogue and banter through the same issues before you move forward. And so I think there's flexibility as a founder board because you don't have there's no government law, at least it did at my former company, about Roger, it was more like ad hoc, hey guys, we got to deal with this massive issue, right? So for me, the thinking process of when do I call a board meeting is it going to impact us long term? Is it going to impact us like substantially from a financial perspective? Is there a material impact? If there isn't, then it's just day-to-day operation was kind of like my rule of thumb. When do I call an official founder board meeting or just more of an operation talk?
Just to touch on that, it's one thing to have a board help you as a going concern or hopefully a growing concern, but when you get into a strategic situation, if your board is not, your board has to rise to the occasion. It's a moment of truth. So that's really, for most companies, I know for Jeffrey's company, yeah, it might go public, likely be sold. The moment of truth is what you're kind of all going and going for, right? So if your board doesn't grow with you and then you have a strategic moment of truth event, it's just complete chaos if you just haven't operated in a fashion of supporting the mission, the success, defining what that is and making it happen as a leadership team. And a board and a CEO are really a leadership team.
Yeah. And I was going to, jumping in on that, I know a lot of people are probably the same way, but I'm running a company with a lot of moving parts. We're growing pretty fast. I would say that I can tolerate things getting screwed up or things not going as we planned, but I hate surprises, in my job. If something isn't gonna, hit a deadline that we have for a customer, I want to know far in advance. I want to be able to communicate it. I want to be able to manage that. And I would say that's something as well with regards to relationships with your board of directors. There's been some hairy situations we've had to navigate through. I would never call a board meeting to deal with that situation, right? I would probably be having casual conversations with various directors on an ongoing basis to let them know what path we're heading down. And then you might have to call a board meeting to authorize a loan or authorize a quick investment or something of that nature if you're in a hairy situation. But it's formal, but it's not formal in a way from a relationship management perspective. And that's at least how I like to operate as well, right? Text someone, call someone, not this formal thing. Just like when I'm meeting with one of my staff members on a Friday and I get dumped a bunch of bad news and things aren't going out on Monday. That's when you kind of have to freak out, right? I'd say a lot of people that serve on boards are probably the same way.
I've sat on many different boards. Half of them deal with kind of my work, which is either investing in companies, advising companies, or running companies. A lot to do with education, both, let's say, old school education. I sat on the board at Queen's MBA for Science and Technology, the University of Ottawa MBA, but also some new kind of education companies. But when I ran my companies, there were serious situations going on. I was brought in to replace these guys. Something wasn't right, and I had never really thought about what am I getting myself into. But typically, a board member would call me up. The recruiters would basically say he has no idea about this industry, and they would say, well, it doesn't seem like we do either right now. The board had lost confidence, and so I'd go in. And, these are like Series C, Series D, semiconductor optical components company. And it struck me as very strange that the first group of people I spent time with were the founders or original leaders, not with the investors, and with the board. And it just struck me, how could it be that after $50, $60 million, 5 or 6 years, you have no idea of what the goal is, no idea really where you're at, and of course you have no idea where to go or what's next? And so it just seemed to me that this is not the way a CEO should think of a board, and this is not the way a board should think of working with the CEO. You need to be, it's not like algebra. Calculus is a bit more difficult, and you've got to think of board calculus, and you got to calculate where we're going. You got to deal with reality. But I found it very frustrating that these people had, brought in a lot of money, had brought a lot of people to share the dream, and they were living a nightmare. And it need not be. Stuff happens, it's not good, but stuff not happening because nobody really thoughtfully dealt with it, made it a dialogue, and get on with it is really distressing. And I'm hoping that with all the companies that we all work with, that we could have that, that attaboy, but also the reality check to keep on going, knowing that, everything is possible if you plan for it and do it. And the likelihood is that most of these things will fail anyway, so what's the harm in trying really, really, really hard, and getting people to help you. So I'm going to let you guys ask questions of each other, and same thing, audience participation is always great. So
does anyone have any questions so far?
Yeah, so because when you think of one thing I see with entrepreneurs early on in dealing with their board is they end up thinking the board is the place to go get approvals versus really the role of management is to set strategy and come with a comprehensive package and then have the board ask you those probing questions to make sure you've got the depth in the areas you want to. Have you ever, how have you dealt with that? And have you ever had a situation where the strategy did end up changing because of a meaningful input to the board? But what advice would you give to other entrepreneurs saying, don't think of your board as the place you go for approval. If you don't go with a plan and a strategy, the board will help you fill it or find somebody who will. You really need to be proactive with them in getting them to ask probing questions to make sure you've got the depth and breadth in your strategy.
I think my opinion as a CEO is it's actually you're the visionary of the organization.
Yeah.
That's a big role for CEO that I think people tend to forget. And if you're not a visionary, you probably shouldn't be in that role because there's multiple functional roles that you can play. And I've had a situation where strategically I think we should go a certain directions. I had a meeting with my founders board, and then prior to that I've had many discussions, but have discussion with founder board and backup with documents. I've had meetings, then I had side meetings with advisors, just kind of get their feedback. And what they do is they help you fine-tune the business.
Yeah.
One of the things that I said to my board advisor, because these were all retired executives who run, billion-dollar business, they're very different from understanding the pain you go through as a startup. They can't even comprehend, but they can help you pay a wider breadth, especially if you want to go international and deal with some of those issues. And what I found with my board advisors is they help me think longer term of the impact of my vision, right? And they help me fine tune where I'm thinking the strategy needs to be. And early on, what I said to those advisors was, listen, I eat, live, breathe this business. And so all of you, if you start a company, you are eating, breathing, living your business. It's your baby. If you haven't had a baby yet, have a baby, and then you'll understand it's your first child, or your second or third, whatever it is, right? It was my first child for like 24 years. And so I said to my board, I will listen to your advice. I will take the advice that makes sense, that helps me, but I will not follow everything you say. Are you okay with that? And if anybody says no, I'm not okay with that, and expect you to follow like you're the parent, I suggest they're not the right one for you. Because you're the CEO, you're the one, I call it, as I say to my team, I set the yellow brick road, right? I know where my brick road is going to end up, or where I think it's going to end up. How it gets there, that's where your board helps you, including the founders, because they understand the business, and the advisors, because they run multi-billion-dollar business worldwide, and they help you get where you want to go by ensuring that you avoid some of the pitfalls that's coming your way in hard.
I think that on that as well, and I think this is where I probably learned to manage this better, is there's, often people on the board are major shareholders of the company. Obviously, I'm a major shareholder in the company. But when I think you start to tend to have better conversations is when sometimes you approach your role as CEO presenting to the board, and you're at the end of the day an employee of the organization, right? And I think sometimes to what actually I train some of my managers and employees on as to my expectations, right? And this is going to revolve around, come back to what Peter talked about, when things get really circular or weird or frustrating at a board level. You know, I always tell employees, like, don't come to me with a problem, right? Any idiot can figure out a lot of the problems our company faces. There's a ton of them, right? And, you know, a good employee comes with a problem and a solution. You know, a great employee comes with a problem, solution, and by the way, this is what I implemented this week, and this is how we're going to be measuring it. And I do think, like, that's similar to how you should be presenting information to your board. Where things went off the rails in the past was, you know, I think I was trying almost more having collaborative discussions at the board level amongst major shareholders and saying, like, look, this is the business, this is a financial how we're performing, this is all going well. You know, here's a problem I see in the market, right? What do we think we should do about the problem? That leads to, like, who's your customer? Like, I don't know, the people paying us I just told you about. To, like, no, here's a problem we're facing, this is what we're recommending, this is how I'm going to build my sales team out. And that's when people start to actually kick in, right? And they say, look, Jeff, you know, you're recommending right now you hire one AE. We should always be hiring 2 account executives at the same time, because, or like things of that nature. That's where they'll start to pull you back. And I'd say provide pretty good input on your operating plan. And that's at least, you know, how less approvals, this is our plan, this is how to approach it. And ultimately they want to see from you what your recommendation is. They get really worried if you don't have a recommendation. And that's, I think, where you have problems. Or even going through a financing round. You know, that's probably when my board's been the most engaged. When you're looking at term sheets, everyone's being impacted. It has different impacts from a dilution perspective. You know, just putting a term sheet in front of a board member can lead to a very circular conversation. They want to hear, like, nope, the CEO is on par with this, feels really good about this. Maybe we've got some problems with some of the minor details, and let's sort through those things. So that's at least been my experience.
So I want to address this idea that the CEO is the company visionary, because I don't believe that's always true. I think there are people that are the visionaries, but because they are also the technical person, that they can't do the job of the CEO, but they are the visionary. Or you could have a visionary who's not actually part of the company, but technically affiliated. This is a challenge. So, as you can see, I'm not 30 years old like the rest of my company. So I'm the CEO not because I'm the visionary. I have part of the vision. But I'm there because the company's not ready for me to move on yet. And so that makes it challenging at the board. So now you sit at the board and there's 2 or 3 visions on the board. And that has to be managed. And I've been told, oh, manage this outside the board, go talk to everybody, get everybody in agreement. And that sounds great. Each person individually, do we agree? Yes. Do we agree? Yes. Do we agree? And they get at the table and they go, well, I'm not sure. And the next guy goes, well, I'm not sure either. And then all of a sudden, all the planning that says I had this figured out, I don't have it figured out. And that's when it goes awry. And I don't know what to do about that. But the idea, if you're the visionary, it's probably really straightforward.
No.
If you're, but if you're not,
I think you had did you have your hand up?
I did have my hand up because I wanted to circle back on this exact issue which Scott sort of brought back, which was, is there some sort of common cause to the source of friction with the words? I know probably more about Scott's word than I know what your words are.
Yeah.
And so that's why I was kind of curious if we could pull that out. And so I thank you, Scott, for being so open about that, because I know that's incredibly frustrating. And, you know, if there was, because some of that is through the board table, or it's a question or something, you know, and they essentially
Yeah.
totally turned on 180 from what you thought you could line them on. So the question, I guess, is, was it something, at the time you bring the board together, a little bit different in Scott's case, because you were the founders as investors, but could you have foreseen that there was going to be such lack of chemistry between the board members? Maybe that's a better way of putting it. Because as you say, in alignment, you have a vision that they're supposed to be acting in the best interests of the community. They're supposed to be hurricane their egos to the side. But might I suggest that maybe it was actually preventing in a way that is posturing between the members, at least some things are.
It's always egos in the way.
Yeah,
That's why it's always egos in the way.
Everyone that's qualified to sit on a board is going to have an ask.
Well, and the other thing, there's always conflicts.
I think most people that are qualified to sit on a board are going to have some ego.
Yes.
Massive ego.
Yes.
So they are all smart people.
Well, and they've all been successful, otherwise they wouldn't be on the board. You wouldn't invite them in the first
Well, and I
place.
think you have to distinguish
I
between,
disagree with that, but anyways, that's.
I think you have to distinguish between, you know, sometimes you're forced to have people on the board because they're investors or they're the founders and there's very little you can do. Well, what are you going to do? Trying to house the founder or get rid of the investor. So that's a very different problem than if you're inviting board members or looking for board members to help you solve the problems, what you would look for, how you want it to agree. Like, I guess to Peter's initial question, yeah, I mean, I got stressed about lots of board meetings, but, you know, that's probably a good thing because it meant that we were challenging each other. Part of the job of the CEO and the board is to call BS if BS needs to be called, not just all the little.
And I have more conflicts with the founders board than the hospital board, right? A lot more conflicts.
So the conflicts, I
But
don't think
it's part of it.
aren't
It's part of,
aren't
you know,
necessarily bad, but if they're circular, that's when I think the problem is.
it's like having conflicts with customers. You gotta have it. I've been threatened by them many times. I've been sued. But, you know, so what? It's part of the job. You just handle it.
So different situation, I'll pull back from my personal experience that was 10 years ago, where essentially a board was put on us, stacked of like-minded individuals who did not agree with the vision of a visionary who was not the CEO. And that led to an enormous amount of strife. You know, to which point we spent 3 years, me acting as CEO, trying to hold this thing together before I could finally get them off my board by virtue of kind of a buyout rights, we'll call it, within the original funding agreement. You know, that's a very specific, narrow situation which unfortunately I think plays out too often, especially when it's the investors are placing board members. And so you've got the investors are placing board members and they're jockeying for position between themselves rather than focus on ultimately their investment, which is not good for anybody, right? It really takes people, distracts them from what this is.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. You know, I was like, I gotta find a way to bring it up, and you just brought it up. You just gave me a reason. Like, no. Like, who's been following the Twitter saga? Elon Musk, right? And I think that's like a pretty interesting one, right? And whether, you know, you fall on, you know, whether you agree with what Elon Musk wants to do with the company, or you disagree, you know, I think a lot of people, rightly so, that were sitting on Twitter's board didn't have a vested financial interest in the outcome of the company, proportionally, right? They had no major, only one major founder left. They're all, but these people don't really care about the best interest of Twitter in the long run.
But
Right?
that goes against the very essence of what a board is and the governance behind it,
I
where
agree.
you actually have a liability and responsibility to care about the very organization that you chose to be on board of.
I agree, but it's kind of to her point of people being appointed that necessarily weren't well aligned from an investment perspective and everything of that nature. And I think that's where you really run into, like I was saying, like that's where I think Twitter's board really was not acting as a fiduciary.
Yeah, but who's making those comments though? People who don't understand what a true board is supposed to do? Or just common people, like seriously, common people, Twitter, right? I mean, the news, like, it's people who make a comment who have absolutely no idea what is the true responsibility of a board with governance to actually have a fiduciary duty to protect the company. So they're like, well, they don't care because they don't have stock in it. Well, most companies who are, you know, big corporations that have board directors, the board don't have any skin in the game in the sense of like, stock options or any sort of shares, right? They're paid, but it's a job,
Yeah.
but they still have a responsibility and a liability to, you know, look after the company to the best interest of the company.
Yeah, it's easy to see how you can get lost later on.
Right.
Early on,
Early's easy.
early on was easy, but even then, that's a bit of an observation, you know, as a board member, as a person, as an investor, my partner in Scott Lake, one of the founders of Shopify, we tell people we're founder friendly. We're in it to support the founder through their journey. Once it's not their journey, it's a different game.
Yes.
But through the journey, you know, we will support the founder, we'll try to find other investors that think like us. That's why we typically are first. And then we try to work with the founders on, okay, you know, where can we go, where can you go? And it's very difficult. I'd say all those situations that maybe Jeffrey's been through that caused questions, concerns, or less than adequate board meetings had to do with how successful do we want to be, how much risk will we take in getting there, and what should we do? And then you had a bunch of investors who had different opinions. Well, be very careful entering the U.S. market. It could be very dangerous.
Yeah.
And Jeffrey's response was, yeah, I kind of thought that. I've never done that. Could you help me figure out how I can do it? You know, rather than tell me don't do it. Or, you know, we were very cautious about raising capital early on.
Yeah.
And then it became clear, okay, now we go for it. Product market fit, international reach, we got to go for it. And all of a sudden, you know, from passing the hat, now we got a USDC. Big change, right? So the only thing that's making it happen is, you know, Jeffrey deciding what's going to happen and having the conviction to make it happen. Again, if we don't know, we don't want to know, and to your point, if we have to know, then maybe we should be saying to Jeffrey, it was really a lot of fun having you here running the company. You know? I lived that dream, right? So anyways, I think that's, like, again, so much depends on the CEO setting the framework of success, not having all the answers, but being very clear, either what the vision and the mission of the company is, and sometimes that's not just money, or it's about the pace of growth, what success means to me, and we're going to put that flag at least for now, and then everybody will follow. All those meetings that you came with, I'm sick and tired of asking, what should I be raising for financing? Here's what I'm doing, bang, everybody's down good with that. Amazing how the CEO can orchestrate the tone of a board meeting and direct the organization. And after all, that is their job, right?
Yeah.
And if the board starts to meddle, you mentioned the wrong board member, or you're not doing your job as well as you could.
Good. Yeah.
Any other questions again? Why don't we go like this? Go ahead. Yes.
So my question is, I'm pretty new to the board of directors and all. So at what
Could you
point,
try to speak up? I don't think they can do I can't hear you.
so at what point for a startup venture should we form a board of directors? And that's first part of my question. Second part is if I have a strategic goal, then if I see that there is a wrong board member, how do I change that? And what's your experience?
I would say I see a lot of these slide decks from real estate companies, and they've got some board of advisors and board of directors, and there's some person who the Venn diagram maybe overlaps with their industry. And I'm like,
Don't do that.
yeah, and I understand why they do it. They want to seem like there's some grown-ups in there and taking care of it. But there's relatively little value in having that window dressing board, in my opinion. The problem I face is that the people that you really want on your board probably aren't going to do it, right? There's liability, you pay them, they're busy people, and so to find that really good fit is a big difference. So I don't think you need to rush to have a board of advisors. But what I would say is, from my experience, for the really early stage companies, probably more important than formalizing a board of directors, which may have limited benefits, is having advisors. I mean, what's an advisor or even a board member going to bring to the table? Hopefully experience. You know, reach. The best board member, I can think of, bring me customers or suppliers or employees, something like that. But having some advisors that you can rely rely on. You can go to your lawyer, your accountant, it's gonna, you have to have a meeting, and it's a week later, but then call them up and go like, yeah, you know what, I've got this problem with this employee or this contract, can you help me out here, and to get a quick response with, a good answer to save you a lot of time, I think is one. The other one that I would say is for some of the really early stage companies, having a board helps the founder because they're no longer the arbitrator. Some employee walks in and says, oh, I want 10% of the company, otherwise I'm quitting tomorrow. It's like, well, it's not up to me. That has to go to the board. Like, we're going to come up with a stock option plan, but it takes the pressure off a little bit sometimes to have one in, have a board to make everybody understand that it's bigger than just the founder. And so I'd be cautious about reading one.
So I have a different perspective than Roger in the sense that I got a board of advisor almost immediately when I became the CEO, right? So I was not the CEO for the first 3 years, took over 3 years after, because the partners felt I was already doing the role without the title. And I never paid my board advisor except for dinner. I've never paid them a penny except take them out for dinner. And the best person, unfortunately, was a gentleman who started a company called, oh gosh, what do they call it? Anyway, they got bought out by Magna in Belleville, massive automation parts manufacturers. And he was the founder and CEO, and he was probably, looking back in 20 odd years now, probably had, let's say, about half a dozen who come and gone, but most of them actually stayed throughout my whole career. And 3, because they were part of the umbrella groups, I had more of a formal meeting through the years, like maybe 1 or 2, or if I was going to have a strategy sessions with the founders, like the other partners, I would invite 1 or 2 to moderate to get their experience. And it was all free, believe it or not, including the CEO and founder who was still running his company in Belleville. He had 2 massive factories, but in that situation, he wouldn't come to my meeting, I would have to drive to him. Right, and it was more to Roger's point, more like a mentor, but I put him under the formal board advisors because, well, it looks like there's grown up, because back then I was 23 or whatever, I was young, starting a company. And and don't get me wrong, there were people who I asked who said, well, what's the compensation? I said, well, none. And they're like, okay, no thanks, right? So it's like finding good employees or good volunteers. It's a lot of work. But I went through the effort, spent a lot of time finding the right ones that I thought, I could learn a lot from these people, right? And took them out for dinner once a year, and that's about it. And honestly, there were 2 rel groups. We went through some challenging time, and I spent a lot of time with those 2 guys, and they came to my office quite often. In fact, when my son was born, I was bouncing him on the table a week after he was born because, I was going to work with a baby, and my son was crying in my office. They're like, oh, bring him into the boardroom. So I'm bouncing him in the boardroom while I'm talking to my board advisors. So I spent a lot of time with those 2 guys in particular. One ran if I tell you who the company is, you would know, multi-billion-dollar business globally. The other one ran probably, I say $500,000 to $800 million company. And I remember asking, I can't remember which one of them, like, why do you guys give me so much time for free, right? And they said, Peg, it's actually enjoyable for us to participate in this kind of environment and to help someone who wants to be helped. And, we're retired, and, how much conversation can we have with our spouse about whatever, shopping, right? Whatever it was. And that was kind of like awakening for me. And, it's really up to you. How much work do you want to spend? Find the right board of advisors, and how much do you want to learn from them? And make them feel like you value their time. I always make them feel like I value their time, I value their advice. I'm not going to follow it, and they don't know all the details. They never run a startup. They don't know the pain. But when it came to by the time it was done, I was exporting 99% of my business, right? So I'm like, well, I've never done it, right? I remember talking to a guy, so this was another individual person who since passed in the Kingston community, and initially was, trying to court him to not be my board advisor, but he wanted to get paid for everything, right? Including how do I enter the US market? And you'd be like, oh, you know, my consulting firm, like, okay, I don't have money. I'm a startup, I bootstrap, no money, so how do I get it for free? So for me, everything was like, how do I get it for free? But free is not free, because free is your time. Free is taking advantage of their experience and trying to tap into what's relevant to you. And so it's important to put in the effort. No different than putting the effort to hire the right senior executive or hire the right employees. I took time, but I was happy with what I ended up with.
Just to, I'm going to say something. Just to add to that, I've helped a couple of people recruit advisory boards, and it is heavy-duty work, recruiting advisory board, and everybody, including myself, I mean, even if you say no in the end, or you say no to that, everybody likes to be approached to join an advisory board or as an advisor. And if you create the rich environment, whether it's a good dinner or not, everybody actually themselves enjoys the networking amongst the advisors to support a CEO that they want to support. And so it's a real charge. I have one last question. Do they actually wear T-shirts with relics on it? That doesn't sound like good branding to me. I wouldn't like that.
So on that, I agree with everything, and I want to jump in is just for some practical advice based on where it sounds like you're at and like how I like to approach these things. Setting up a board of directors isn't going to solve your business problems or help you get to the next phase often if you're an early stage company. What I like to do, and this has worked really well for me, and this helps me from a recruiting perspective, helps me build my team, is try to identify people that are the next stage is where you want to get. And what I mean by that is I've been very fortunate to be able to have mentors in a similar way that are very far in their career. They're very accomplished people. The people that I find provide me the most value are CEOs at that next phase. So they were where I am 3 years ago or 2 years ago. And constantly getting out and talking to those people, you'll really quickly realize the problems you're facing are not unique. We all like to think that our problems are unique, they're not. And then you'll come up with practical ideas, and those people can actually sometimes help you the most, especially when you're getting going. And so I would be thinking always okay, now my company is 10 people, I need to be talking to someone that's a CEO that's running a 40-person company. And reaching out and trying to just get their advice. And in many ways, as a CEO or building a business, you should be constantly talking about your business and your strategy. And you not at work, on a daily basis, you will become a better and smarter entrepreneur. Anyways, that's helped me a lot. Again, the informal stuff. People like to give back. They like to be super helpful. If anyone meets you for the first time and asks for advisor shares or money like that, tell them to screw up. That's a sign of someone that doesn't have the vested, is not in it for the right reasons. And you do see a lot of that bad behavior in the ecosystem. I would caution you from that. But yeah, people will be willing to help. I think there's a question in the back.
So another question as we move across.
Yeah. Thank you. I wanted to ask a question I get asked a lot.
Can you speak up again? Sorry.
Yeah, there is a question I get asked a lot about when does a startup need, let's say, a strategic plan, and what's the role of the board on canvas? No, not that one. Yeah. And where does the role of the board become important in that process, and how? Because one of the key questions that probably people have is, if you look at startups, it's like firefighting, things happening really fast. You won't maybe even have the time to do the planning you need to do, or to catch up with whatever is happening outside the startup. So there is a lot of questions around that space, and maybe a bit of guidance on how to approach it would be really great.
And I guess the intersect with the panel perhaps is, does the board help you with your strategic planning? And when might that come up as something that they would think they should do, or the CEO would ask them to do?
Yeah, so I'll jump in on that from my perspective quickly. So something I have strong opinions on is there's a lot of stuff in the tech ecosystem that are making you waste your time. And so I made the joke, I don't know if you heard me about business model canvases. I was asked to do that when I started my company all the time. Absolute waste of time. At that phase, if you're like pre-revenue or you're figuring out your revenue, like you should just be talking to customers. I think that is how you're going to learn about your business.
Yep.
The number one thing should be talking to customers. I was like, anyways, I don't want to talk about that. But there's times in your business where you're going to think in weeks. There's times when you need to think in months, and then there's times when you need to think in quarters and in years, right? And from my perspective, I probably was thinking in months until we got to like $1 million in revenue, right? And then we started thinking in quarters and like planning a little bit, and then now we're probably thinking in years, right? And so you have to have, and people probably might disagree with me on this, but like this is my style, like you need to show that you have a strategic plan on how you're going to execute, but like be thinking in the phases that are relevant to the stage you're at. You can waste a lot. I studied political science at university, and I learned really quickly that accountants make up sort of spreadsheets as much as like a political science essay for early on. Like a 7-year financial projection when you have 50 grand in revenue.
Any other quick comments? Then we'll move to another question.
I think what Jeffrey said is actually very relevant. Take a step back. So we're all here with the assumption, I assume, that we want to grow a scalable business that we can eventually exit, right? Because I also do some mentoring on the side. So if someone wants to be paid, it's not a bad thing. It's just depending on where they are in life. So I think it's a bad actor. I think it's just a matter of you got to figure out what you can and cannot do and who and what you want. So, but I do have startups that are like randomly call and say, hey, I've heard, would you can I spend some time with you? When I do those on an ad hoc situation for free, just again, giving back to me. So, but going back to your questions, if you are in a business that you're looking to scale and you're looking to grow because you want to, exit with an 8 to 9 digit sales or IPO, whichever that may be, then the sooner you can put a strategy together, the better it is. But to what Jeffrey's saying, you don't want to overthink that strategy because a lot of time it's about execution. It's about going, if you have a technology or a product, going into the market with minimal viable product. Shocking enough, I was at a conference where the CEO or the president of GE years ago had paid this consultant, I don't know how many millions, to talk about minimal viable product. We did it because we didn't have a choice. We went into the market with a 3D model with a customer that we trust and was very honest with them, and we launched our product that way. So the sooner you can get to the market with your product, the better it is. But from a strategic point of view, going with what Scott was saying earlier, I still believe that the CEO is the visionary. And when I talk about visionary, I'm not talking about the visionary from a technical point of view, right? What your product's going to look like. If you're not an engineer or not technical, like I'm not, then yeah, you count on your CTO or the partner who does have an engineering background to have a sense of what the technology is. But as a visionary, you know the roadmap of your industry. What are the pain points from the customer's perspective that you're trying to solve? If you don't understand that as a CEO, how can you solve that? If you don't understand that, how can you develop a strategy? Going back to the board, whether it's a formal or informal board or a founder board, if they are good, they should be helping you fine-tune that strategy. They're not going to be the one that created for you, because if you are the visionary, then you have a sense of the strategy that you're putting in place to achieve your targets. But they help you fine-tune with their knowledge, their past experience, and or their backgrounds. I'm not an engineer. I don't even have a technical background. There's no joke with my partner after 26 years. Some of the opportunities I used to bring to the table, and they're like, no, Pang, we don't design turbines. I'm like, yeah, but you're a mechanical engineer. They need a mechanical engineer. I'm like, yeah, but, just because we're a mechanical engineer doesn't mean we can do everything, right? So that's a joke. But my point is, as the CEO, you may or may not have all the different functional skills. I'm going to assume you don't. My skill is commercialization, marketing, and sales. That's my skill. I can do a lot of the other business stuff, operation, HR, accounting, finance, but I don't have a technical background. I'm not very good at operation. I count on those who do report to me and their background, and together we develop a strategy, because whatever vision you have, they have to be able to have their piece of the pie to act to your full circle. So the sooner you can do it, the better it is to get to your end goal, and the better it is for you to figure out, who do I want on my board? Or who do I want on my advisory? Or who do I want as my mentor, right? So,
Any other, sorry.
I'll make a brief comment. So, the job of the CEO is to articulate the vision, not to have it. If you have it, great, but your job is to articulate. That's what's important. Because it has to come from many people. If the company is only you, well, you better be really good.
Any other questions? We're a bit over time, but we have maybe a couple more minutes. I know Jeffrey has to get on an investor call and thank you. But I'm going to ask a question of Jeffrey and Scott before we leave. Oh,
Finally, on the topic of
finding suitable board members. How do you go? You answered a part of it, and Jeff, you too. But I'm still a little dazzled. Over many years, I didn't choose to have a board. Then I had a board. I was sick and sorry for what I did, and then I'm back to not having a board. So the question is, when you get asked, when you actually want to have a position holder and say, so what's in it for you? What's in it for me? Kind of questions. How do you guys go about it?
Well, I'm going through that process right now. Actually, we were working on it this morning, because I'm recruiting my first kind of really independent director, a true independent director. And for me, it's as simple as somebody that that has strengths in areas that I have weaknesses, and like very strong strength in areas that I have weaknesses, and I think it is going to contribute to helping the business grow. Right? Like just broadly speaking, like. It doesn't make a lot of sense for me to recruit someone with like, the same skill set as I do, the same personality as I do. Knowing two of those people in the same room once a year. And so yeah, for me that's that simple. My weaknesses, people's strengths, I think that can add value.
I think the other thing that ties in with another comment you made, though, I mean, you made a comment about strategies about spending time with customers, and observations, you shifted your strategy 3 times because of customers that you got to know and other problems you could solve that are actually more interesting and hopefully more profitable. But also, you're looking at your customer and market community to look at an independent board member, again, because of the relationship with the value of bringing the change, what it is you've got to look at. So that's kind of interesting.
So I'll answer that in the context of the advisory board, not the board of directors. I'm not actually looking for someone with a different skill set. I'm looking for someone who sees my market differently than I do. It's not that we don't have similar skills, it's that we look at the opportunity and see something different. And that causes me to reflect. And then we have to change. But I've got 2 companies right now. One's 25 years old, never had a board of directors. And one is 2.5 years old and started out with a board of directors. The 25-year-old company is modestly profitable lifestyle company, will never have a board of directors because everybody's content. We just move along. The young company is not content in that sense. It does want to grow. And there's some learning you have to do. And the board of directors is forcing that learning. So in a sense, it could be, our only external member of the board really is so much further ahead of us, technically speaking, that he's like a weather vane on our engineers is what we're doing. And that's critically important. But he has no experience as a board member. So I'd say if you know you need to grow, and if you know you're a young company, if you know you want to get bigger, sooner or later, you're going to be faced with boards, and that's what we now. And you learn before, you make big decisions.
The other thing to do, which is not always easy, is, Jeff mentioned the network with other CEOs. It's not that public or private, you'll get good recommendations on who or where to look and where not to look perhaps. So, any other, I'm going to put Jeffrey and Scott a bit on the, honestly, so much of what we talk about is how do boards help you grow and how we help you grow as a CEO. And so I'm curious, what do you guys see as your, this is an employee meeting, or actually this is a recruiting session, right? Trying to recruit people to join the journey. What do you say the goal is? What is success for you right now as you see it? And it's Scott.
As a business? Yeah, so,
However you want to qualify.
I'm doing this a lot right now. So, at the end of the day, we build software to help people advance their careers. I think that's a huge opportunity. We think people, change their jobs often, and I think it's a huge market. We compete against, massive professional services organizations like Randstad, Manpower, Adecco. They cumulatively do about $90 billion a year of revenue. I think they're immoral leeches on society with regards to how they're, honestly, sorry if everyone's a residential real estate agent, but just kind of make money flipping talent around in a similar way to how real estate agents flip houses. So we want to beat them, and how we measure success is how many people we support on an annual basis. We have very strong unit economics, and at the end of the day, my job is to make sure we're continuing to grow so that we support more and more people. The next major milestone we rallied our company around is 40,000 users a year. At that number, we will be at a much different phase of our company, which I think will give us more options and give us those options as to whether we think we're going to hit a wall and we should look at acquisitions or start growing with revenue or finance the company that we do further. Right? So for us, we really measure that success based on the number of people who are helping find another job. And at the end of the day, and this is the funny comment Peter's coming back to, is with regards to who's your customer, right? Because I just used the number that isn't our customer. Our customers are the corporate clients, paying often for these invoices, but we really rally our team around that North Star. And that really helps us from a focus perspective with regards to how we prioritize our features and what we're working on. Like, we come to work every day to help people advance their career and move forward, right? And if you can't get excited about that, like, I don't know what to tell you. And so that's us, and that's how we measure success. So I know what the IPO number of users would look like, right? I have a good understanding of that, and so kind of going back from that allows us to set I think short, medium, and longer term goals, and that really allows us to evaluate and make simple decisions with regards to what we prioritize, right? Because disagreements with customers, customers are paying you a lot of money. They want you to do something different that might not actually help you make more money or get closer to deliver more users. So anyways, so that's how I break it down, and that's how I measure success. And unless our pricing model fell apart, we'd have a pretty good understanding of our cash economics just by picking a number out of the number of people we support on an annual basis.
Scott?
We can answer in two different ways, really. First, I'm a founder CEO that's going to be replaced. So we start with that. So success is my being replaced, because it means that the company grew to the point where it was relevant to bring someone in. So that's first. Secondly, so what do we do? Why did I get involved in this? We measure how people move, how they perform. Whether that's to make them better athletes, whether that's to make a better running shoe, whatever you need to measure how someone moves, by what the brain's doing or not doing, is what we do. That drives me. Now, I do know that the end product of being able to track people is the metaverse, and I could care less about it. But that is where we're going. If you want to have the metaverse, this virtual world, be relevant, then you have to track people. Because how we move subtly, you have to track them well, and you have to be able to get their facial features. You have to feel in a virtual environment like you could read the eyelids.
Yeah.
And that doesn't interest me. Except that's my technology. So my job is to get to the point where I can work with athletes or work with people in rehabilitation and let the company fly. That's kind of two different visions.
I'd really like to thank the panelists for joining today. I'd like to thank all of you for being here, for Queens, for hosting this very first, for being this in-person session. And again, listening to the accomplishments and the journeys of entrepreneurs really thrills me, and I'm really thrilled to being able to learn more about what you've done, and even in the case of Jeffrey, who I'm quite connected to, learning a bit more about how he relates to these journeys with others of his peers. So thank you all very much.
One thing I'll say is, if anyone wants to contact, I'm going to have to jet out in about 20-25 minutes, but if anyone has any questions, especially people, if they're seriously thinking, if you're thinking about starting a business, feel free to reach out. You should be able to find me pretty easily on the internet. You should have my company info in the information. You can find me quickly on LinkedIn.
And I thought you were going to ask for recruiting.
Yeah, we're hiring.
We're hiring.
So, yeah.
Okay, thanks very much.
Well, I too would like to thank the panelists, obviously Peter, but thank the panelists very, very much for being so open and honest and sharing of your experiences and your insights that you've gathered along the way. And I think being able to segment the opportunities at different stages of the company's growth has been very insightful. So thank you very much.
Thank you.